All right, everybody. For today's critical thought, we're going to be wrapping up our discussion on replayability in game design, or how to design a game so that it's meant to be replayed over and over again. Now, over the last few parts, we've talked about things like item generation, loot tables, multiplayer, and the like. But we're going to sum it all up in today's video. And that has to do with the concept of variance in game design. And for our talk and going forward, variance will be defined by the number of different and legitimate runs that a game can present to the player. Now, different and legitimate are very important to define when we're talking about variance. And this is where a lot of developers, especially first-timers when it comes to roguelikes or roguelites, tend to slip up on. So, the first part of that, different. When we talk about different, we're referring to the number of possible combinations that can actually challenge the player in unique or different ways. So, when we've talked about things with biomes, what's inside each biome doesn't change what you're doing. It's the biomes themselves that actually affect what the player will experience. In a game like Spelunky, for instance, there's technically 5 biomes. You have the temple, jungle, ice, I think there's a cave in there, and then the hell biome. Each biome has its own unique environmental obstacles, enemies that can appear, and possible events. In a lot of open world survival games, there's very little variance because of the fact that they don't really present different ways of playing it. And if you've watched anyone play a survival game, be it Don't Starve, Factorio, Ark, The Long Dark, any game where the player has to start with nothing and build themselves up, even something like Minecraft, for instance, there is always a set checklist of things you have to do right from the beginning. Usually it's, gather lumber, build basic tools, get a safe area going, look for tier 2 resources, and repeat. And it doesn't matter how detailed or how unique or original the world is if I'm still doing the same thing each time. Now, when it comes to roguelite or roguelike design, when we talk about games that have an issue when it comes to different, it has to do with just how many set options there are while I'm playing your game. Again, it doesn't matter if you procedurally generate levels if it's still picking or still choosing from a very limited pool of possible choices. And we've talked about this with roguelites, or roguelikes, similar to something like a robot named Fight, where despite it featuring a procedurally generated world, everything that I'm doing is still fixed. I'm going to the same exact zones in the same exact order, and yes, I may be getting new weapons or getting different weapons each time I play, but there's so little, or the pool of possible choices is so small that it doesn't really matter if the levels are procedurally generated, because I'm just going to start repeating what I'm doing over and over again. And that right there is the first sign that you have a problem with your roguelike design. That if after like 2 or 3 runs, I'm already getting repeats of rooms or situations, that's not good. What you want to have is a lot of factors or elements that the game can pull from. When we talked about Darkwood, for instance, in my post and when we did a video series, Darkwood, from its basic design, technically only has 4 biomes, the 4th one counting the swamp that you exist in Chapter 2. If you want to make that more replayable, have a greater pool of possible biomes, but let's say the game will only use 2 or 3, or 4, anything like that, out of a possible 10 or 15. Because the lesson for today is this: the less fixed or set elements in your game, the greater the chance there is for variance. This is why multiplayer games have the element of replayability, because the human factor is such a strong element of making things different. Again, play 10 different people, you can have 10 vastly different experiences. And that's where that popularity comes from. Now, the other term that I use, legitimate, when it comes to run design, that's the other factor. Because as we've seen, for those of you who are longtime fans, you know we have played a ton of roguelike and roguelite design games here on the channel. And one of the easiest or one of the biggest traps designers fall into is not designing the game around an immediate win. What I mean is, a good roguelike game, I should be able to beat your game on my very first run. Now, am I going to do it on every game? No, because I'm inexperienced. But the game should give the player all the options they need in that run so that the run can be a success. And this is, again, where a lot of developers tend to falter on. Because if the run is not designed around a possible win, but a future win, that's not an acceptable form of variance. We've talked about this before with games like Rogue Legacy and In Celebration of Violence, where the persistence system there essentially requires you to keep grinding and playing matches to level up your character's profile or unlock new abilities to then get that run win. And that's not a smart way of playing. Because again, as we've said before, when it comes to dead time, that's all wasted. If I need to be level 30 to have any chance of beating your game, then I'm going to spend the previous 29 levels just, farting around, essentially. And when you're trying to make things legitimate, it also means there has to be the options in-game for that to work. One of the big problems that FTL has in terms of legitimate runs is that because it features a fixed boss at the end, it greatly limits the number of possible options that I have to beat that game. So yes, there are a lot of different items and events that can show up in FTL, but there's only a select few that can give me a winning run. And if you've played FTL, you know that you can have runs where that final boss fight is ridiculously easy. And then you'll have runs where it just feels impossible. I also saw this when I played the game Convoy as well, which was kind of like a FTL but meets Mad Max game, if you've never seen that. But the point is, in order for there to be true variance, not only does each run have to feel legitimately different, but I need to have a legitimate chance of winning, or there should be the abilities there for each run to come out a success, even if the player does or does not see that. And again, the go-to example when we talk about that level of variance is, of course, the Binding of Isaac, which in the companion piece over on Game Wisdom, I went into more detail about how it presents variance there, and you should be seeing a link to it somewhere on this video right now. But to go in a different direction, one of the more interesting aspects when it comes to creating more variance in your game is understanding what it is that's happening over the length of a playthrough. And a playthrough, again, can be 20 to 30 minutes. It could even be several hours. And that's a very interesting point, because one of the best genres when it comes to having variance in them is the quote-unquote grand strategy. Now, grand strategy is a very interesting topic, and one that's probably too big to get into in this video. But it's the idea of playing against an AI or a human, not just over the course of one battle, but over managing an entire group or entire collection of systems, with these choices and consequences playing out over multiple matches and hours of play. You can look at any game from Paradox Interactive as an example of this, or Paradox Software, or even something like the grand campaigns in XCOM and XCOM 2. In these titles, what Firaxis did was create a number of possible variables or elements that keep the player guessing and avoid the too many fixed elements. Now, with that said, though, whenever you have something that is guaranteed, that will rob the game of some variance. This is a problem that even games like XCOM or Civilization or any grand strategy game tends to falter on. Because again, the beginning is always fixed. Anyone who's played Civilization knows that there is a pretty set build order from when you start playing. Now, there is some level of variance based on what your starting conditions are. Am I near a source of metal? Is there a good source of food or wheat nearby? Do I have an ocean? Is there fishing? But once you've kind of got around that initial step, then you go into kind of your checklist mode. But with the top at hand, how to create variance, once you understand what kind of choices or decisions is your game built around, by adding more elements to that pool, it will lessen the number of fixed possibilities. This is why we've talked about supplemental content so much in a game like XCOM or The Binding of Isaac. In XCOM, I know what my beginning is. I know what my end is going to be. It's going to take out the council, or in the original XCOM Enemy Unknown, go after the alien base. But everything that is between those 2 points is up for grabs. What mission types am I going to run into? Is an alien lord going to show up? What faction will I side with in XCOM 2? And Firaxis has done an amazing job of taking this campaign structure and just adding more tools and gears to the proceedings so that I don't know how things are going to play out. Even the idea of their foundry with having it spawn random elements or random items is a simple form of that. Now, with The Binding of Isaac, again, all the expansions that they've added, even though they have added elements that have extended the campaign with more levels and more final bosses, a lot of the content in The Binding of Isaac and its future expansions have been supplemental. More items, more enemy variants, more biome variants as well. All this stuff does is, again, say that, yes, I'm going to be playing Binding of Isaac in 30-minute to an hour-long spurts. But each one of those playthroughs is going to be entirely different. And it's almost impossible for 2 runs to be exactly the same because so many elements in The Binding of Isaac are randomized. And that's where true variance lies. If I can play your game differently and legitimately with every single run, then you know you've gotten something that's going to be very replayable. But getting to that point, though, is very tough. For instance, when we played, I think it was like a few weeks ago, the game City of Brass, and there was one other roguelike that the name is escaping me right now. I'm sure one of you watching this will know it. The problem with City of Brass was there wasn't enough variance because too many elements are fixed based on what my move set is and what I need to do in each level. If I always have the same end goal and nothing else is really going to change that or impact what I'm doing, it doesn't matter how much you randomly or procedurally generate environment. This is the same point I said earlier with the open survival genre. You can completely create a brand new world at game generation or new game generation. But if I still have the same 10 things I need every time I play, it doesn't really matter. And this is, again, where that challenge lies. But to wrap things up for today, there's one final point. And that is, despite spending all these videos and all these posts talking about it, variance is not the magic solution to great game design. Just because your game can be played multiple ways doesn't excuse if your gameplay sucks or if it's, technically not working. But like a lot of things that we talk about that are understated with game development, the best games will usually have these elements kind of fall into row or fall into line simply by virtue of the designer. Usually games that have really great game design or gameplay have really great UIs because that was a part that the developer thought about when they were building it. And if there's good UI, they've also probably thought about how people are going to replay it. So there's variance there. But the point is, and I've said this before, but just having random or procedurally generated content doesn't make your game replayable. It may make things a little bit different, but unless the hooks and the pulls are there to create variance, which once again is different and legitimately possible wins or legitimate runs in your game, then people aren't going to stick around. And again, when we say each run has to be different and legitimate, we mean every run. Because again, even if you have a persistent system in play, I don't want to spend 60 playthroughs to get to that one magical one where now I have a chance to win. This is the subtle brilliance, and this is the last point we'll say about the Binding of Isaac, is that even though the end game, or people who have played through and unlocked all the endings and all the different harder variants, and the people who have just started, you can still beat that game. What they do is they make it harder by unlocking new content. But you can still beat the Binding of Isaac very early on. And all that stuff is then used to gate out the progression model. The progression curve. So that once you've proven that you're ready for the harder stuff, it's there. But you are still winning the game as you go along. And that is just a very subtle way of keeping the player invested in growing and still letting them win. Because, like I've said, I've played too many roguelikes where it just feels like everything is out of my control. And if you do have fixed elements, introduce more things that the game can pull from to shift things around and shuffle. And again, I keep saying one more thing, but there's just so much to talk about. But very quickly, we're now Explorers International Society. People complain that the original final chapter where you fought Rivalu was too constrained in terms of how much luck you had over the campaign and if you had the right perks and party. So what Abbey Games did with the expansion was introduce a second final map that you can play. And that one features a far looser set of objectives and requirements. So that while Rivalu can still be your main goal, it's not so much a case of if I don't have my party right here, the game's going to be a loss every time. Now it's, if my party is here or above, I'll go to Rivalu. If it's below that line, I'll go to Dinosaur Island. And again, I can still have a chance at winning. And I'm not locked to those set constraints. But before I get even more about this, we'll wrap things up here. So let me know what are some of your favorite examples of variance in game design. And be sure to check back for daily discussions on game development here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. But until our next video, have a great day. Before we get to the credits, just want to give a quick shout out to the fans and supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/GWBycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.